There is something ruling you right now. You might not admit it, you might even laugh it off, but if I asked you to go one full day without it, you'd feel the panic crawl up your throat. Maybe it's your phone, maybe it's caffeine, maybe it's the endless scroll that eats your nights and your peace. Whatever it is, it owns a piece of you. And you call it my habit, as if you're its master. But truthfully, you're its servant. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And that's the secret most people never face. It's not the world that enslaves you. It's the small, invisible chains you build each time you surrender to comfort. Every person who likes this video is taking a vow, a quiet one, to grow stronger today. Subscribe only if you're ready to keep practicing one habit, one day at a time. This isn't a channel, it's training for the soul. So, how habits become chains. You weren't born with this habit. You built it, one repetition at a time. Like a sculptor, but instead of shaping stone, you've been carving grooves into your own mind. Modern psychology calls them neural pathways. The Stoics called it prohairesis, the faculty of choice. Every time you give in, you teach your mind what to expect, what to crave. And soon, your choices stop feeling like choices at all. You tell yourself, just one more scroll, one more drink, one more hour. And the next moment, an entire evening has dissolved into fog. In ancient times, men feared the lash of tyrants. Today, we fear the sting of boredom. The result is the same. We obey. But the Stoics had a rule. If something controls your peace, test your power by removing it just today. Quit one bad habit, even for a day, and you will taste the first flavor of freedom. The inner battle, the war within. When you try to quit, a strange thing happens. Your body protests, your mind bargains. Suddenly you see how many voices live inside you. There's the rational voice, small but steady, whispering, "You can endure this." And there's the craving, loud, emotional, impatient, screaming, "Just this once." This conflict isn't new. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, once said that philosophy began when he was shipwrecked. He'd lost everything. And yet he thanked fate for that disaster because it stripped away illusion and forced him to confront himself. You're shipwrecked each time you face your own craving. In that storm, you see which part of you commands the ship and which part panics. The Stoics called the ruling center of the soul the hegemonikon, the command fortress. When a desire arises, it's like an army knocking at your gate. You can open the gate, or you can observe it from the walls and let it pass. That moment, that space between urge and action, is where freedom hides. Modern life tries to erase that space. Every notification, every advertisement, every shortcut is designed to make you react before you reflect. To master yourself, you must reclaim that pause. If quitting one habit is how you reclaim freedom, then mastering your thoughts is how you keep it. In the next session, I'll show you the Stoic secret Marcus Aurelius used to command his mind when the world fell apart. Don't stop here. Continue your training. The Stoic Method, the 4 steps of freedom. Step 1. Awareness. The Stoics practiced prosoche, constant attention to the self. Today, that means noticing what pulls you. When do you crave it most? What emotion triggers it? Loneliness? Boredom? Fear? You cannot master what you do not observe. Step 2. Delay. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is endurable, endure it. Stop complaining. When the urge comes, don't fight it, just delay it. Say, 'In 10 minutes, I'll decide.' Most urges fade faster than your resistance. You don't destroy them, you outlast them." Step 3. Reframe. Instead of thinking, "I'm losing pleasure," think, I'm gaining strength. Cleanthes compared discipline to building muscle, painful at first, powerful later. Every time you resist, you prove to yourself that your reason commands your instincts. Step 4. Voluntary discomfort. Seneca trained this daily. He slept on the floor, wore rough clothes, ate simple food, not to suffer, but to remember that he could endure. Try this in your own way. Walk without your phone. Drink water instead of caffeine. Sit in silence without music. When you choose discomfort, temptation loses its weapon. These steps aren't heroic. They're humble. But freedom is built from humble acts repeated with courage. A personal challenge, the one habit. Let's make it real. Think of one habit that's been draining your power. Not all of them, just one. Choose the smallest one that still matters. Maybe it's the habit of checking your phone the moment you wake up. That's not harmless. It rewires your brain for distraction before your mind even opens its eyes. So, tomorrow morning, you don't touch it. You wake, you sit, you breathe. You write one line, "Today, I will master myself." It will feel strange, unnatural. You'll itch for that familiar dopamine. But in that discomfort, you will meet the version of you who could have always done this. I once knew a man, let's call him David, who couldn't stop checking social media. He'd promised himself to quit, but the habit was stronger. Until one day, he locked his phone in a drawer for just 1 hour. It felt like withdrawal. He walked circles in his apartment. Then, silence. He noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the rain on his window, and for the first time in years, he felt time slow down. That 1 hour turned into 2, then a day. A week later, he didn't feel cured, he felt clear. That's the secret. Quitting one habit isn't about perfection, it's about reclaiming the smallest space of clarity in your life and guarding it like your kingdom. You've proven you can resist. Now it's time to transform. The next session reveals how to turn your discomfort, your cravings, your pain into the fuel that drives self-control. Keep going. The training doesn't end, it deepens. The illusion of control, the modern trap. You've been told you can have everything: success, comfort, pleasure, peace. But those promises contradict each other. You cannot live in peace if you're constantly stimulated. You cannot be strong if you never deny yourself. The modern world sells you comfort as freedom. The Stoics called that slavery. Look around. Every product is marketed to ease discomfort. Don't think, tap. Don't wait, order. Don't feel, distract. And yet people are more anxious than ever. Why? Because when everything becomes easy, nothing feels earned. And when nothing is earned, your spirit decays. Zeno taught in the Stoa, the painted porch, where merchants and common men passed by. He didn't hide in temples. He believed philosophy was not escape from the world, but resistance within it. To quit one habit today is to stand against an empire of impulse. But I need it. Here's the voice that will rise in you. But I need it. It helps me relax. It's not that bad. That's the same voice every addict, every comfort seeker, every self-deceiver hears. It's not the voice of reason. It's the voice of rationalization. Even Seneca admitted he enjoyed luxury, but he practiced detachment from it. He wrote, "I don't mind owning things, so long as they don't own me." You can still enjoy your coffee, your entertainment, your pleasures, if you remain their master. But you'll never know if you're the master until you test yourself. Philosophy without practice is just decoration. Wisdom untested is a story we tell ourselves to feel moral. You prove freedom by acting, not by agreeing. The Stoic athlete of the mind. Imagine your mind as a warrior. Every urge is an opponent. Some days you win easily. Other days you're bloodied but standing. Marcus Aurelius faced the same daily war. He wrote his Meditations not as a book for others, but as a command manual for himself. He reminded his own soul, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not metaphor, it's training. Every time you refuse an urge, you strengthen the muscle of command. Every time you fall, but return again, you teach yourself resilience. The Stoics believed virtue is a habit too, one built from countless small victories. Each time you choose clarity over craving, you build character. Each time you resist, the chains weaken. This is why Stoicism survives across millennia, because the human struggle hasn't changed. Only the temptations have new logos. The science behind Stoic practice. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Habits form in the basal ganglia, the brain's autopilot system. When you repeat a behavior, neurons fire together and wire together. To change a habit, you must rewire that loop through awareness and conscious interruption. This aligns with Epictetus's method. 1. Recognize the impulse. 2. Pause before judgment. 3. Choose according to reason. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, one of the most successful modern psychotherapies, was directly inspired by Stoic philosophy. Psychologist Albert Ellis once said that if he had to name a single thinker who shaped CBT, it would be Epictetus. So, when you practice Stoic awareness, you're not just following ancient wisdom, you're applying one of the most evidence-based methods of change ever discovered. The fear of losing identity. Some people resist quitting habits because they think, "This is who I am. I'm just not a disciplined person." But that's not identity. That's inertia. Marcus wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." You are not fixed. You are painted daily by your choices. Your habits are stories you keep retelling, and you can stop mid-sentence. There's an old Stoic analogy. The mind is like a dog tied to a cart. If the dog runs willingly, it moves freely within the line of fate. If it resists, it is still dragged by the same path, only choking itself in the process. When you cling to your habit, you're that dog. When you accept the need for change and act, you become the runner, still bound by life, but moving with dignity. The moment of decision. You might be thinking, "But it's too late for me." That's a lie. As long as you are breathing, the command fortress still stands. Cleanthes began philosophy as a poor water carrier. He worked nights, drawing water to attend lectures by day. He didn't have time. He made time. He didn't have motivation. He had resolve. Your battle may be smaller, but the principle is the same. Quitting one habit today is not a minor act. It's the same rebellion that shaped empires of thought. You don't have to erase your vices overnight. You just have to prove, once, that they don't own you. Modern paradox. Constant stimulation. Deep emptiness. We live in an age of abundance, And yet the more we consume, the hungrier we become. The Stoics warned that pleasure pursued for its own sake turns into poison. The first sip is joy, the 10th is dependency. Modern science shows dopamine spikes when anticipation rises, not when pleasure is received. Meaning, you're addicted to the chase, not the satisfaction. That's why your bad habit never truly satisfies you. To break free, you must find joy not in stimulation, but in stillness. Not in excess, but in mastery. When you sit through your craving and watch it fade, you experience something rare: sovereignty. The quiet pride of knowing you are no longer an instrument of impulse. A day without chains. Imagine waking tomorrow, free of one small chain. You walk into your morning without autopilot. You taste your coffee without distraction. You breathe without anxiety. No one may notice. The world won't applaud, but your soul will. This is why Stoicism calls for internal victories, not external validation. The universe doesn't need to know you won. You need to know. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." So today, say this: I will be free of this one habit, and then do what that identity requires just for today. Tomorrow, you can decide again. Each sunrise is a new training ground for freedom. The long road to mastery. You will fail. You will relapse. You will tell yourself it's pointless. But Stoicism was never about perfection. It's about practice. Marcus fell too. He admitted his frustration, his fatigue, his anger, but he kept writing to remind himself who he wanted to be. That's your job too. To remember, even when you fall, that you are not your failure. You are your effort to rise. One day, the habit that once enslaved you will appear in front of you again, and you'll smile. Not from pride, but from peace, because it will have no power anymore. The freedom of one choice. So here's your challenge. Today, quit one bad habit. Not forever, just today. Let the world tempt you and smile. Let your mind beg and breathe. Let the craving speak and stay silent. Because in that silence, you will meet the truest version of yourself. Calm, unmoved, free. You don't need to conquer the whole mountain. Just take one honest step upward and the path will reveal itself. Zeno said, "Well-being is realized by small steps, but it is truly no small thing." So start small and watch your freedom grow. Your new command remembers, you are not your habits. You are the one who decides whether to obey them. Every moment you delay, reflect, and choose, you reclaim command of the fortress. And soon, the walls that once confined you will become your shield. Quit one bad habit today. Not because it's easy, but because you deserve to know what it feels like to be free. You cannot change the world in a day, but you can quit one bad habit today. And that is how freedom begins.